Good morning students. I am Dr. Vijay Lakshmi, Associate Professor of Pathology. So in this class I will discuss about coagulation disorders. So this is the overview of this topic. First I will tell about the introduction followed by classification of coagulation disorders. So classification is divided into two types, hereditary and acquired coagulation disorders. First I will tell about the hemophilia A followed by hemophilia B, and next one is von Willebrand disease. Last one is disseminated intravascular coagulation. So all this hemophilia A, B as well as von Willebrand disease and disseminated intravascular coagulation, they are the important questions for you. And hemophilia, it's an essay question for you. And then coagulation disorders, usually petechiae and purpura are uncommon. So unlike in case of ITP, it won't present like that in coagulation disorders. So how it will present is, it will present in the form of large hematomas and ecchymosis. And other clinical features are usually the patients will present with prolonged bleeding after trauma and also after surgery and after following tooth extraction. And bleeding can also occur into the gastrointestinal tract and urinary tract and also into the weight-bearing joints. So if it occurs into the weight-bearing joints, it is called as hemarthrosis. First I will tell about the hereditary coagulation disorders. So in this hereditary type, usually it will affect a single clotting factor. And the most common and important inherited deficiencies are, if there is deficiency in the factor 8, it will lead to hemophilia A. So if there is deficiency in the factor 9, it will lead to hemophilia B. So next one is, in case of deficiency in the von Willebrand factor, it will lead to von Willebrand disease. And this von Willebrand disease is also discussed here because it will influence both coagulation and platelet function. Next one is acquired coagulation disorders. So in this type, it is characterized by multiple clotting factor deficiencies. For example, in case of vitamin K deficiency, it will result in the impaired synthesis of factor 2, 7, 9, 10 and protein C. So all these factors it will be deficient in case of, if there is deficiency in the vitamin K. So how we can remember these vitamin K dependent factors is by this mnemonic. See here, 2 plus 7 is equal to 9 but not 10. So by this mnemonic you can remember these vitamin K dependent factors 2, 7, 9, 10. So next one is, in case of liver disease also there will be deficiency in the coagulation factors because liver is the main organ which will produce many coagulation factors. So in case of this severe parenchymal liver disease, this will lead to its deficiency in the coagulation factors. So next one is, in case of disseminated intravascular coagulation also, so multiple clotting factors it will be consumed so that it will be deficient. So before going to the topic proper, first see this case scenario. A young boy came with a history of massive hemorrhage after trauma and recurrent hemarthrosis in large joints and following this muscle hematomas and progressive deformities occurring in the joint, so by leading to crippling. And some of the family members also suffered with the identical clinical manifestations. So all these clinical features, they are pointing towards the diagnosis of hemophilia. That means hemarthrosis in joints and muscle hematomas and also crippling and also positive family history is there. So all these are indicating the history of hemophilia. So coming to this hemophilia, there are two types, hemophilia A and hemophilia B. First I will tell about this hemophilia A. It's the most common hereditary disease associated with life-threatening bleeding. So it is because of this mutation in the factor 8. So, and it is inherited as a S-linked recessive trait, and so that it will occur more commonly in the males and homozygous females. Very rarely it will occur in the heterozygous females. Clinical severity of hemophilia, it will depend on the level of factor 8. So if it is less than 1% of normal level, it will cause severe disease. So if it is between 2 to 5% of normal level, it will cause moderately severe disease. So if it is between 6 to 50% of normal, it will cause mild disease. Next is pathogenesis. So in case of severe cases, there will be inversion of X chromosome so that it will completely abolishes the synthesis of factor 8. So less commonly there will be point mutations in the factor 8 so that it will impair the function of protein. So if there is some active factor 8 if present, it will cause mild to moderate disease. So you may get a doubt here. So why in coagulation disorders also bleeding it will occur? So in case of normal persons, what will happen? So soon after any injury, there will be vessel constriction, it will occur. So after that, the clotting factors, it will be activated, so that it will form a strong platelet plug. And against a stable fibrin mesh, it will form a sealed clot over the platelet plug, so that it will stop the bleeding. So in case of this hemophilia, what will happen? So because of this lack of this factor VIII, so that means only a weak platelet plug it will form, so that the incomplete fibrin mesh, it will allow the bleeding to continue. That's why bleeding, it will occur in coagulation disorders also. How the patients will present in hemophilia? So that means a clinical presentation. So there will be easy bruising along with massive hemorrhage after trauma or any operative procedure, and also bleeding, it will occur into the joints. So bleeding in the joints is called as hemarthrosis. Because of this recurrent bleeding, this will cause deformity in the joints, so this will lead to crippling, and the petechiae are absent in hemophilia, and also spontaneous bleeding, it will also occur into the brain. So this is the picture showing the subcutaneous bleeding which has occurred over the forehead soon after trauma, and in this second picture you can see the bleeding which has occurred into the joints. So it's called as hemarthrosis. So this is the other picture showing the bleeding in the joints. So here you can see the joint, it is enlarged because of this accumulation of blood in the joint. So this will lead to deformity in the joints also, thereby leading to crippling. Next is laboratory investigations of hemophilia A. So as it's a deficiency in the clotting factor, here the bleeding time and platelet count, it is normal, so they are not affected. So what is the thing which is affected in hemophilia A is factor VIII it is deficient in hemophilia A, so that the intrinsic coagulation pathway, it is affected, so that the partial thromboplastin time, it is prolonged, whereas prothrombin time, it is normal. The definitive diagnosis is by doing this factor VIII assay. So it will be deficient in hemophilia A. The treatment for hemophilia A is by giving recombinant factor VIII. Next is hemophilia B. It's also called as Christmas disease. So why it was called as Christmas disease is it is named after the first patient who was diagnosed with this disease, and it is not a holiday. So it is characterized by deficiency in the factor IX. So the clinical manifestations are similar to factor VIII deficiency, and it is inherited as an X-linked recessive trait. Here the factor IX is absent in majority of patients, so but in 15% of patients, so it is present. So if it is present, it is non-functional. So here also the partial thromboplastin time, it is prolonged, but the prothrombin time, it is normal. The diagnosis is done by factor IX assay. The treatment is by giving recombinant factor IX. The other name is Christmas disease, and also called as Doyle disease. So this factor IX deficiency, it will be there in hemophilia B. So the clinical manifestations are similar to hemophilia A. So there will be easy bruising, and also spontaneous bleeding, and also hemarthrosis, muscle hematomas, and bleeding following surgery, and also following tooth extraction, and bleeding into the GI tract. This will cause melena, and bleeding into the urine. So this is called as hematuria. So next one is von Willebrand disease. It's the most common inherited bleeding disorder of humans. So and the frequency is about 1%. So why it was discussed in these coagulation disorders? Because so this von Willebrand factor, it will influence both platelet function as well as coagulation. That why it was discussed here. And the type of inheritance is autosomal dominant type. And usually in our body, the von Willebrand factor, it will bind to factor VIII, and it will form a von Willebrand factor VIII complex. So usually this von Willebrand factor, it will bind to factor VIII, and it will form a von Willebrand factor VIII complex. The function of this complex is it will promote endothelium platelet interaction hemostasis, and also it will promote coagulation. So von Willebrand disease, it is heterogeneous. That is more than 20 variants have been described, and it is grouped into two major categories. First is type 1 and type 3 von Willebrand disease. So usually in this type, it is associated with reduced quantity of von Willebrand factor. The type 1 type, it is a autosomal dominant disorder, and it accounts for 70% of cases. So here in this type, moderate to mild deficiency of von Willebrand factor, it will be there. Whereas in type 3 type, it is a autosomal recessive disorder characterized by extreme deficiency in the von Willebrand factor, and it will produce severe manifestations. And type 1 type is characterized by mutations in the von Willebrand factor, whereas type 3 type it is characterized by deletions and frameshift mutations. Next one is type 2 von Willebrand disease. It is characterized by qualitative defect in the von Willebrand factor. So it is accounting for almost 25% of cases. So several types have been described, of which type 2A is the most common one, and it is an autosomal dominant disorder. Here the von Willebrand factor, it is produced in normal amounts, but it is defective, qualitative defective it is there in this von Willebrand factor. So because of this missense mutations, there will be formation of this defective multimers. Next is laboratory findings in von Willebrand disease. So there is defect in the platelet function, but the platelet count it is normal, so that there will be prolonged bleeding time. So because of this defect in the platelet function, the prolonged bleeding time it will be there. So the coagulation pathway it is also affected, because the von Willebrand factor it will bind to factor VIII. So factor VIII it will influence the coagulation, so that the coagulation pathway is also affected in this von Willebrand disease. So there is decrease in the von Willebrand factor, along with this decrease in the factor VIII levels, so that it is reflected by prolonged partial thromboplastin time. And also there is defect in the platelet aggregation with restocytin cofactor. Next is treatment of von Willebrand disease. So we will give desmopressin. So this desmopressin it will stimulate the von Willebrand factor release, and also infusion of plasma concentrate containing factor VIII and von Willebrand factor. Next is disseminated intravascular coagulation. It's an acute, subacute or chronic thrombohemorrhagic disorder, and it occurs as a secondary complication in many different diseases. So it is characterized by activation of coagulation sequence. So because of this activation of coagulation sequence, this will lead to the formation of thrombi in the microvasculature throughout the body, so that it will lead to the thrombotic dialysis. So there will be consumption of platelets as well as fibrin and coagulation factors, and also there will be activation in the fibrinolytic mechanism secondarily. And this microthrombi which are formed, this will occlude the blood vessels, so that it will cause tissue hypoxia and infarction. And sometimes it can also present as an hemorrhagic disorder because of this depletion of factors required for the hemostasis. Next is etiology and pathogenesis of disseminated intravascular coagulation. The two major mechanisms which will trigger the disseminated intravascular coagulation are: first one is release of tissue factor or thromboplastic-like substances into the circulation. Second one is widespread endothelial injury. Endothelial injury it can initiate disseminated intravascular coagulation in several ways. So because of this injury to the endothelial cells, this will expose the subendothelial matrix. So this will cause activation of platelets, and secondly this will lead to the activation of coagulation pathways, both intrinsic and extrinsic coagulation pathways. And this endothelial injury it will also cause the release of tumor necrosis factor, and this tumor necrosis factor it will induce the endothelial cells to express the tissue factor, and also it will induce the endothelial cell to decrease the level of thrombomodulin, so that it will shift the hemostasis towards coagulation. And this tumor necrosis factor it will increase the expression of adhesion molecules on the endothelial surface, so that it will favor the leukocyte adhesion. So because of this increased expression of adhesion molecules, the leukocytes it will adhere, and this endothelial damage it is caused by these leukocytes. By the release of these reactive oxygen species and preformed proteases, this will damage the endothelial cells. Now I will discuss about what are the various causes which will lead to disseminated intravascular coagulation. So widespread endothelial injury can be produced because of the deposition of antigen-antibody immune complexes, for example in case of systemic lupus erythematosus, and also in temperature extremes like heat stroke and burns, and also because of these microorganisms like meningococci as well as in rickettsial infections. So in these conditions, septal endothelial injury it can unleash the procoagulant activity by enhancing the membrane expression of tissue factor. And also in case of obstetric complications like abruption of placenta, retained dead fetus, septic abortion, and also in amniotic fluid embolism, and also in toxemia of pregnancy, tissue thromboplastin substances it can be released into the circulation. Next is in case of sepsis and also in other infections, endotoxin will be released in the body. So these endotoxins, it will inhibit the endothelial expression of thrombomodulin. Directly or indirectly, it will activate the release of TNF. And also this TNF, it will also stimulate the release of thromboplastin, and also it will activate the factor 12. And also in neoplasms like carcinomas of pancreas, colon, lung and stomach, and also in acute promyelocytic leukemia, there will be release of thromboplastic like substances into the circulation like tissue factor, mucin and other undefined tumor products. So in case of massive trauma, extensive surgery and also in severe burns, the thromboplastic like substances, it will be released into the circulation. And also in hypoxia, acidosis and shock, there will be widespread endothelial injury. So because of this widespread endothelial injury and also because of this tissue thromboplastic like substances, so this will lead to the disseminated intravascular coagulation. The possible consequences of disseminated intravascular coagulation are twofold. Firstly, there is widespread deposition of fibrin within the microcirculation, so that it will lead to ischemia of the severely affected or more vulnerable organs. And also this red cells, it will squeeze through the narrowed microvasculature, so that it will cause fragmentation of the red cells. So it will develop microangiopathic hemolytic anemia. Second one is hemorrhagic diathesis. So it will result from the consumption of platelets, clotting factors, and also because of this activation of plasminogen. So all of this, it will contribute to the hemorrhagic diathesis. So activation of plasminogen, it will lead to the formation of plasmin, and this plasmin, it will cleave fibrin, so that it will form fibrin degradation products. And this plasmin, it will also digest factor 5 and as well as factor 8. And these fibrin degradation products which are released from this fibrinolysis, it will in turn inhibit thrombin platelet aggregation as well as fibrin polymerization. So this is the flow chart showing the pathophysiology of disseminated intravascular coagulation. So because of this massive tissue restriction, sepsis and also endothelial injury, and also because of some other causes, there will be release of tissue factor. So this will lead to the formation of microvascular thrombosis, and also this endothelial injury, it will cause platelet aggregate, so it will lead to the thrombosis formation, and this thrombus, it will in turn occlude the blood vessels, so it will be vascular occlusion, so it will lead to ischemic tissue damage. And the red cells, it will flow through this narrowed microvascular channel, so it will lead to the formation of microangiopathic hemolytic anemia. So because of this widespread microvascular thrombosis, there will be consumption of these clotting factors and platelets. So there will be hemorrhagic diathesis, it will occur, so it will contribute to the bleeding. And also the plasmin, it will be activated, and this plasmin, it will contribute to the fibrinolysis, so it will lead to the formation of fibrin split products. So these fibrin split products, it will in turn inhibit thrombin as well as fibrin platelet aggregates and fibrin polymerization. So in turn, it will contribute to the bleeding. And also this plasmin, it will also lead to the proteolysis of clotting factors like factor 5 and as well as factor 8. So in turn, it will contribute to the bleeding. So all of this, it will contribute to the hemostatic derangements in disseminated intravascular coagulation. Next is laboratory findings in disseminated intravascular coagulation. So as there is the consumption of platelets as well as coagulation factors, so there will be low platelet count as well as prolonged prothrombin time and partial thromboplastin time. So as there is activated fibrinolysis, the fibrinogen levels, it will be lowered, and also there is increase in the fibrin degradation products and D-dimers. And on the peripheral smear, we can see schistocytes. It's nothing but fragmented RBC. Next is morphology in disseminated intravascular coagulation. Thrombi are most often found in the brain, heart, lungs, kidneys, adrenal, spleen and liver in the descending order of frequency, but any tissue can be affected. In the affected kidneys, it will show thrombi in the glomeruli, and also in the severe cases, it will show bilateral renal cortical necrosis. And the thrombi, it can be seen in the alveolar capillaries in the lungs, and in the lungs, it will lead to the formation of hyaline membrane, and this hyaline membrane, it is composed of edema and fibrin exudates. In the central nervous system, it will produce fibrin thrombi, and this fibrin thrombi, it will lead to the formation of microinfarcts, and sometimes it will lead to the hemorrhages also. And in the adrenals, it will lead to the formation of fibrin thrombi, and also massive adrenal hemorrhages, it will occur, and this will lead to the formation of Waterhouse-Friderichsen syndrome. And in the pituitary, in the postpartum stage, this will lead to the pituitary necrosis, and it is called as Sheehan syndrome. The clinical features, it can be The onset can be permanent in case of endotoxic shock or amniotic fluid embolism, and the onset can be either insidious and chronic in case of carcinomatosis and retention of dead fetus. And in the peripheral smear, we can see microangiopathic hemolytic type of anemia, that means fragmented RBCs, nothing but schistocytes can be seen in the peripheral smear. And the other clinical features are the patients will have dyspnea, cyanosis, and respiratory failure. And the CNS clinical features are convulsions and coma. The renal manifestations are oliguria and acute renal failure. And the patients will develop either sudden or progressive circulatory failure and shock. So in case of obstetric complications and also in major trauma, it is dominated by bleeding diathesis. So in case of cancer patients, it is dominated by thrombotic complications. And the prognosis of disseminated intravascular coagulation is highly variable and it largely depends on the underlying cause. And the only definitive treatment is to remove or treat the inciting cause. So that completes this coagulation disorders. Thank you.